And a seemingly big breakthrough where Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a ceasefire. To get you all the details of this, let's just go across to my colleague Diksha Bisla, who will be getting us all the details. Over to you, Diksha.
Right, Him, let's unpack all the details. Now, Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a ceasefire in Gaza after days of indirect talks in Egypt. Now, what does it include? We're going to break down all of that and let you know. Now, a source close to the negotiators told AFP that Hamas will release 20 living hostages. Israel, in exchange, will release nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners and 250 among those serving life sentences and 1,700 others who were detained since the beginning of the war. The exchange should take place within 72 hours of the implementation of the deal. Now, a daily minimum of 400 trucks of aid will enter the Gaza Strip for the first 5 days of the ceasefire, which is to be increased in the following days. Meanwhile, reports also said that the deal stipulates scheduled withdrawals of Israeli troops. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari has said that both sides have already agreed on all the provisions and implementation mechanism of the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that he will convene his government today to approve the agreement. The deal will be formally signed around midday in Egypt. Meanwhile, Hamas officials said that negotiations for the second phase would begin immediately after that. Now, in announcing the agreement, none of the major parties addressed key sticking points, including the disarmament of Hamas and the future of Gaza. Well, before the announcement was made, Trump received a note during White House meeting saying a Gaza deal was very close and seeking his approval for a social media post. Very close, said the note, handed to Trump by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and seen by an AFP photographer in the room. Well, in a post on Truth Social Network, Trump said that all of the hostages will be released very soon and Israel will withdraw its troops to an agreed-upon line, calling it the first steps towards a strong, durable and everlasting peace. Netanyahu has invited Trump to address the Knesset in Jerusalem during a phone call between the two on Thursday morning. Back to you, Him.
Well, thank you so much for all the updates on that, Diksha. And to discuss this further, we're now being joined by Major Dan Feifuman, National Security Analyst and Intelligence Officer and co-editor of Middle East 24, as well as Mohammed Najib, War Correspondent and Security Analyst. Welcome both to the broadcast. Major, let me just come to you first. And what's your take on this first phase that they both have agreed upon? The question still remains, with this hostage deal end the war in Gaza? And it's important that we draw a distinction between the two as well.
Yes, first of all, thanks for having me on. The main two words that I would use to wrap up the last few days, and especially the news from Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, is cautious optimism. And I think you brought up a very important point here, and that is this is essentially two deals, maybe even I would say three deals brought together in one package. So you have an immediate ceasefire deal that that is supposed to see the release of the remaining Israeli hostages, 20 who are thought to be alive, in exchange for a cessation of this current war and an Israeli withdrawal, not entirely out of the Gaza Strip, but to agreed upon lines that provide a security perimeter within the Gaza Strip, at some points hundreds of meters from the Israeli border, at some points maybe a kilometer or so. And so this is really the first part, and this ends this current round of fighting. The second part is going to be, and this is something that Hamas has been pushing for since the beginning. Of course, Hamas understood, and part of its plan, we knew it could not win a war against Israel. And so its strategy, and has been since 2006, when it started launching these attacks against Israel, is strike Israel and then manipulate the international media and then push for a ceasefire. So that's what it wanted. The second part is going to be much trickier, because the second part, while it is a win for the Palestinians, it is a loss for Hamas. Hamas has to be willing to accept defeat. Israel, of course, had to agree that it wants no control over Gaza in the long term, that it will not resettle Gaza, had to agree to let basically a non-Hamas entity, maybe the Palestinian Authority, retake the Gaza Strip, which is something that it was very hesitant to do given the weak performance of the Palestinian Authority in the past. But it is essentially Hamas agreeing to disarm, dismantle, and it's very hard for me to see how it's actually going to agree to implement what is essentially its own loss, its own exit from the political scene. Hamas wants to retain power. It wants to retain its arms. It has shown over the last 2 years that it has not just zero regard for the well-being of the Palestinian civilians, but they are quite useful pawns in its long-term strategy, and it's willing to sacrifice them quite readily. And so it's very hard to see how the second phase will play out
Right.
and who will be the one to actually disarm and dismantle Hamas.
Right, Mr. Najib, let me just come to you on the same question. Of course, there are questions that linger over disarmament, the administration to follow, and what happens in the second phase. That's the first big point. The point here being, do you think this 20-point peace plan has done enough to address issues of deep distrust between the two sides and also be able to guarantee and ensure that this deal goes on smoothly even when it comes to the second or the third phase of this?
I think Trump 21 points are not ideal for the Palestinians, but this is the best on the table, and I think Trump had find a safe exit for both the Palestinians and the Israelis to get out of this war, and he pushed intensively to make it happen. So he engaged the Turkish, the Qataris, the Egyptians, and the Americans themselves, and himself following this, and this is a rare opportunity. I think this is a great significant development for our Israeli neighbors who suffered a lot because of these 2 years of war, and also for the people of Gaza. I'm not talking about Hamas, about the civilians in Gaza. So I think this is a great development, achievement for the civilians. I was also in Tel Aviv at Kabla Street. I saw the Israeli families of the hostages, how much they suffered during the past 2 years, and also the civilians in Gaza suffered. So this is a very important when take a human side of this issue. But about Hamas disarmament, also I can tell my colleague that also the Palestinians don't want to see Hamas in governance. The people of Gaza, the people in the West Bank, the Egyptian, the Arab countries, because what Hamas did wasn't good for the Palestinians, wasn't good for the Israelis, wasn't good for the whole region. They destroyed the stability for the last 2 years and caused a heavy cause, and it also defamed the image of the Palestinian cause. Palestinians look like a terrorist because instead of becoming struggling to have a state live in peace beside the state of Israel. So the plan is not an ideal, and it needs to work a lot, but I am sure that the mediators will do maximum efforts to make things happen and to reach a ceasefire and to allow the entry of the humanitarians and to allow the Israeli hostages to go back safely on Monday back to Israel. So that will be great for the region, and thanks to Trump who did that.
All right. Now, some may argue that perhaps a few months ago, even this would have seemed like a Herculean task, like an impossible task, an impossible feat. That being said, we are seeing an agreement, at least on the first phase. The big question still remains. There are lots of points which remain vague in this 20-point peace plan as well. That is the future of the Palestinian statehood, of course, the big question of Hamas disarmament, which we have now discussed. That being said, I want to pose this question to both of you, Major. I'll come to you first. Is this truly the beginning of the end, or is it just another phase deal that we're seeing right now?
Well, I mean, it gives the potential for longer discussions that have not been on the table in quite some time. I think it's worth pointing out here that one of the reasons that we were able to come to this point where Hamas is willing to at least say it's going to accept this plan, which includes its own disarmament and its own exit from the political scene, is because of the ramp up of military pressure on Israel, because of the weakening of Hezbollah, of Iran, the exit of Assad from Syria. And then, of course, you have Trump in the White House. You have the Arabs themselves who have made it quite clear, including just a month ago, that Hamas, who in their own words at the Arab League, who instigated this, needs to step down and disarm, and the region wants to move on. Even Hamas's backers in Qatar and Turkey are calling now on Hamas to step down. And so it was that pressure kind of realizing, as my colleague said here, that Hamas has brought no good to the Palestinian people. If you are a proponent of the Palestinian cause, this has been a huge setback for them, both in terms of the destruction
Right.
to Gaza, but also the standing of the cause. What you're going to need to see here is a continuation of pressure, and the Americans are going to be absolutely critical here to keep the leverage points on Hamas strong. That is in terms of
Right.
pressure on Turkey and Qatar. The Turks and the Qataris want concessions from the Americans here. That is why they did their calculus and they understood that the benefits they will get from the alliance with America is much
Right.
more important than their failed proxy in Gaza. And so America has to make sure to continue to use its leverage
Right.
and its leadership of the region to ensure that Hamas, because Hamas will try to find a way out of every point of the rest of this agreement at every way,
All
and the
right.
key is going to be in the implementation.
Mr. Najib, let me just quickly come to you. We're running out of time here. I want to know what your opinion on that is, because it seems as though Trump has really cracked out the whip here and said that failure right now is not an option. Do you think that's what the case is, or are we really seeing the beginning of the end? If you could just quickly sum up that.
I think what achieves right now is great, and I think the mediators and the sponsor, Donald Trump, will not leave any opportunity for either Israeli side or Hamas side to get out of that or to violate the reach agreement. He's also coming to the region to support that next week and maybe speech at the Knesset. And I think that the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or the Qataris or the Egyptian can say no to Trump. No one in the region can say to Trump. So because Trump is the deal, it is the biggest guarantee and the most important that he will bring back the Israeli hostages who suffered a lot for 2 years in Hamas captivity to Israel and allow the entry of humanitarian aid to the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza and stop the war and the sufferance of the civilians. So this is a great achievement. But talking about Palestinian state or not Palestinian state, look, Hamas is a problem for the Israelis and also it's a problem for the Palestinians. And I learned also, and I hear from my Israeli friends, also Netanyahu wasn't good for Israelis as he's not good for the Palestinians who doesn't want a Palestinian state. But I think there
All
are
right.
elections in democratic state like Israel, and also here the Palestinians will organize elections. And I hope they will not vote for Hamas and will all of those will be disappeared from the image and the region will enjoy
All right.
stability and real peace.
All right, Mr. Najib and Major Fiferman, thank you so much both for joining us on WION World as One with your perspectives on this.